1, 2, 3.
The following is the full uncut conversation from our episode Faith and Fascism. Rob Reiner and Dan Partland tackle Christian nationalism with God and country. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to our member supporters.
What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? To answer rocker Elvis Costello's well-known question, there is nothing funny about those basic tenets of Christian belief. But mix religion up with a macho, messianic form of white nationalism, and you get a very toxic brew, one that's dangerous not only to the very idea of secular democracy, but also to Christianity itself. History has seen crusades before, but today's Christian nationalism is posing a real and immediate threat. In God and Country, their new documentary based on the book The Power Worshippers by Katherine Stewart, director Dan Partland and producer Rob Reiner look at the phenomenon of Christian nationalism with insights from scholars and activists as well as Christian leaders like Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. Rob Reiner first came to fame as an Emmy award-winning actor in the landmark TV series All in the Family. He went on to become an acclaimed director of some of the most popular motion pictures in American history, including When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride. He's also a dedicated political activist, as you'll hear. Dan Partland is a longtime documentary producer and director for film and television, also a 5-time Emmy nominee with 2 Emmys for Best Nonfiction Series, including one for American High on Fox. Together, they are sounding a very urgent alarm, which makes me particularly glad and honored to have them with me on this program. Welcome both. I am so glad to have you with us, and I learned a lot from this film of yours, God and Country. For one thing, the huge role that Christian nationalists played in the January 6th insurrection. Dan, you want to start? What do we need to know about what happened the night before, January 5th?
Well, the uprising, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th was basically a Christian nationalist uprising, which is not to say that everybody there was a Christian nationalist, but it was a unifying theme. And I think what people should know is that it wasn't coincidence that all of those people were at the Capitol that day. There were churches and conservative Christian groups organizing concerted protests to bring people to the United States Capitol on January 5th for a thing they had done a bunch of times prior called the Jericho Marches. The idea of the Jericho Marches was to symbolize, in Christian terms, the taking down of the government. The story of Jericho is that the walls come crumbling down. So they had brought everybody to the Capitol, and it was well known, highly publicized within certain Christian circles that the event on the 6th was going to be an effort to undermine, to block the election, the certification of the election.
Well, it all drove home to me just how much more seriously we need to take this phenomenon and how much more closely we in the media need to look. Your film, God and Country, directs our attention to this question of Christian nationalism. And to kick things off, let's give our viewers and listeners a chance to check out the trailer. Check it out.
America and Christianity are like baseball and apple pie, and we celebrate them together.
I was 16, 17 years old when I became a Christian.
I'm an evangelical minister.
I've been a Christian my whole life.
I'm a Christian nationalist. I have nothing to be ashamed of because that's what most Americans are.
Is Christian nationalism Christian?
No, it isn't.
We should be blazing forth as a countercultural example, and instead, we're leading the charge of malice and division.
Christian nationalism uses Christianity as a means to an end, that end being some form of authoritarianism.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
God wants America to be saved.
They're told over and over and over again that you're in danger.
You need to fight if you don't want to lose your country.
We are in a civil war between good and evil.
This is not a movement about Christian values. This is about Christian power.
What happens to the people who don't believe this stuff?
are on the precipice.
God is on our side. We're taking our nation back.
The thing that keeps me up at night is that we lose democracy.
Does that seem possible?
Yes.
Among the voices you heard in the trailer, Protestant minister and social activist Reverend Dr. William Barber, Catholic sister and U.S. Presidential Medal of Honor winner Simone Campbell, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, evangelical pastor and former pro-life leader Rob Schenck, and editor-in-chief Christianity Today and public theologian Russell Moore.
Coming to you, Rob Reiner, one of the producers on God and Country. American as baseball and apple pie, is it? Christian nationalism?
Well, I mean, America can be baseball and apple pie, but and Christianity is certainly a part of the fabric of America. There's no getting around that. The problem that with Christian nationalism is they claim that America should be a Christian nation, that it was founded by the founding fathers to be a white Christian nation. And we know, based on our Constitution and how it was written, very clearly there is a separation of church and state. We're a pluralistic society, and it is mentioned 3 times in the Constitution. And we actually start the Constitution by saying, "We the people." So it gives the power to the people, not to a particular church, and gives us the freedom to pray however we want. So the problem is to say that Christian nationalism, which is a political movement, it's not a religious movement, it's a political movement, that should be tied into what is American, is a little misleading.
Well, that gets to the question of what is Christian nationalism and what sets it apart. And Dan, your film traces its origins. We don't have time to go into all of it in this moment, and I hope people will actually check out God and Country, the doc. But if you were to summarize, what makes Christian nationalism of today different from perhaps the conservative religious movements we've known in the past?
Well, I think you've stumbled upon what the difficulty is. First of all, it's very, very hard to define Christian nationalism, and we spend a fair amount of time in the film just doing that and hearing from a lot of different perspectives, different voices about how they would define it. And I find it a terrible term. It's very problematic because it does sound like something that should be quite benign, something that's about love of country and something about love of your Christian faith. Who wouldn't want both of those things? I think but what you're pointing out is that I think it's a big mistake for a lot of people who are not on the political right in America. When they're criticizing this movement, they frequently group together everything that is Christian and conservative and call that Christian nationalism. That's very dangerous. There are certainly valid conservative points of view. There are valid Christian conservative points of view. But the problem is, the reason they make this confusion is that the current Christian nationalist movement, which, as Rob said, is a political movement, it is not a faith, has become the dominant form, the dominant expression of Christianity in America. That's what's really scary. And you pointed out in your intro that it represents a danger not just to American democracy because of the ways in which they can use both democratic and anti-democratic means to try to implement this Christian agenda into law, but also the danger that it represents to the church itself because of the ways that it's co-opting the idea of what Christianity is about and undermining the central tenets of the faith.
We have experts in the film, very conservative Christian, devout Christians, leaders, thinkers, pastors, who talk specifically about how this movement is completely antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. And that's really what is what you have to focus in on, because the idea that you could promote a political agenda in the name of God, and that would give you permission to resort to any means to get what you want, up to and including violence, which we saw on January 6th, is completely antithetical to the teachings of Jesus, which is love thy neighbor, do unto others, and so on.
There is a public theologian, Russell Moore, in your film, one of the people behind Christianity Today, who speaks to exactly that question. Here's another clip from God and Country.
The Bible does depict a warrior Jesus, just with a very different kind of warfare. The warfare takes place spiritually through the means of the gospel, not through physical violence. In the New Testament, Jesus repudiated that when his own disciple, Peter, pulled out the sword to defend him from being arrested. And Jesus said, "Put away your sword. Those who live by the sword will perish by the sword."
How big is this movement? I mean, back to you, Rob. There's a moment in the earlier trailer where a certain who will go nameless, attention-seeking MAGA Republican says that most Americans are Christian nationalists. How true is that?
That's not true. That's not true. The vast majority of people in America, or the largest plurality, are Christians. There's no question about that. But Christian nationalism, the way we talk about it in the film as this political movement, it is not the majority. It is far from the majority. And what is scary is that because of the way our system works, a very virulent minority can control our politics. And that's what they've done. They've figured out a way to take this movement, which is very well funded, very well organized, and much more so than it was historically, which started back in the 50s, and they've funneled this organization into Donald Trump, and he is their spokesperson for this. And so you can gain a tremendous amount of power with maybe 20, 25, 30% of the populace.
Donald Trump seems like a pretty unlikely Christian leader of any stripe. Rob?
Yes. I mean, when you think about what he's done, I mean, the man was found guilty of rape, essentially, sexual assault. And, he's cheated on into his businesses. He's stiffed people. I mean, the list goes on and on. The man has been indicted 91 times for crimes against the country, against citizens, and so on. This couldn't be further from anything that we think of as Christianity.
And yet here we are. What is the theory of change on the part of this, as Rob's just described it, minority movement? How do they seek to wield power in what is supposedly a democracy, which is ruled by the majority? They're a minority. Dan, so how do they imagine they'll do it? Or how are they doing it?
Well, there's two ways, and it's important to talk about both of them, because I think they are using both democratic and anti-democratic means. And the problem with some of the things on the democratic end of the spectrum is, in general, we in America, we embrace that. Make your case by persuasion. Move the public point of view in order to get laws enacted. But there are a couple of exceptions to that, and those are contained in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is inherently an anti-democratic check on majorities, so that even if you get the votes to insert elements of any particular faith into American law, that is not allowed. That is not allowed. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It still happens, but it's not. It's unconstitutional. The more concerning thing is the ways in which this movement has, as it's felt its power diminishing in the electorate, it's become increasingly anti-democratic. So that's everything from gerrymandering districts. Both sides obviously do that, but gerrymandering districts inherently anti-democratic. Voter suppression has become a main goal of this movement, and intimidation. And then obviously violence itself, both on January 6th and at other times, is and I think we should expect to see more political violence in this coming 2024 cycle from this movement that is looking to use intimidation to implement their goals.
There's violence and intimidation, and then there's fear and anger. And you have another very powerful participant in your documentary, God and Country, and that's Rob Schenck. People may remember that name, evangelical pastor, used to be a leader in the Right to Life movement. I remember him from the days of Operation Rescue. He is singing a slightly different song, but he tells the story of how the tactics worked in the documentary. Check it out.
Evangelical enterprises raise billions of dollars. We're not talking about millions or even hundreds of millions anymore, but billions of dollars in mostly $10 to $25 contributions. Well, the way you get those contributions is by ginning up fear and anger. When I was an activist on the religious right, I would meet with fundraisers. I would hear from them, "You've got to give me plenty of fear and anger. I need to make your people as mad as hell and frightened to go to sleep at night, because when they're that afraid, they're going to send you a lot of money."
So ginning up fear and anger to make money. It all sounds incredibly hypocritical and cynical. Is it, Rob?
Well, yeah, obviously it is, but they know it works. Yeah. And that's the problem. I mean, you can gin up fear and anger, and it can be directed in any particular direction. And if you are feeling disenfranchised, you're feeling like you've been left behind, if you're feeling fear that the other are starting to take over the country, and that you might at some point become a minority yourself, and that you believe that this should be a white Christian nation, that could engender a lot of fear and anger. And so they can then use that fear and anger not only to raise money, but to move this political movement along. And it's very scary, because people are not really understanding what the movement is. They're just finding a vessel to place their fear and their anger, and obviously money goes along with it.
And there's two sides to this story. What you've just described is mirrored in a sense by maybe some of the rest of us not finding a way to explain to people why they feel things have been taken from them or are being taken from them, that isn't about the other, that instead perhaps tells the story of corporate extraction, government capture, taking from the poor to the rich, and solidifying that power of money in this country that leaves a lot of people feeling shut out. Dan, as you think about the work you hope this film will do, who's your target audience and who are you trying to reach? Do you think they're reachable?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a filmmaker, it's a mass media thing. You want everybody to see the film. I mean, of course, who wouldn't want everybody to see their film? I think that there are a lot of different audiences. I think the most important one to me, in a sense, is this, I think, a rather narrow portion of people who are maybe they're conservative Americans, they're Christian Americans, they want to be good American citizens, they want to be good Christians, and are sort of being unwittingly swept up in this because they're hearing these messages reinforced again and again and again. They're hearing them from pastors, they're hearing them from family. We all live in these media silos. You hear these messages again and again, it becomes normative for your group. And I think there are a lot of people, there's tremendous evidence, there's a lot of people, American Christians, who are starting to really be ill at ease with the overall direction of their political leanings, of their church, of this movement in general, and they've been swept up in it. So we're definitely interested in reaching those people because I think those people are reachable. I think that in general, putting this message out to the world and bringing focus on it to a whole lot of people, the majority of us are not on board with this. So part of the goal for the film is, of course, just to give a framework for talking about it, to shine a spotlight on the issue so that people who are aware have more focus and are giving it the proper attention, but definitely also to reach what I think is a large swath of the country who's inadvertently getting swept up in this and really doesn't want it.
How would you answer that same question, Rob?
Well, I think also we're seeing around the world the rise of autocracy and theocracy, and it's a clarion call to say, this can happen here. Our democracy is fragile, as we know, and a small but virulent and powerful group of people can hijack a democracy and turn it into something that is so far afield from what we have come to know as American democracy, that we've seen the progress of in fits and starts, no doubt, but over 249 years, that idea of self-rule is in danger. So we want people beyond, the people who are questioning what direction their faith is being taken, but just generally the idea that America is the beacon of democracy for the rest of the world. And if that democracy crumbles, then it portends a danger throughout the world. So we want everybody to understand that a small group of people can turn a democracy inside out and destroy it.
And stepping back a little bit, how good a job do you think we're doing of telling those other stories, Rob? I mean, you've seen media change over the decades. And I will say, thinking back to the days of All in the Family, we have really changed the class of people that we see on television for the most part. We now have, Succession and Billions, and it's almost as if our culture is only looking at the very affluent top. Maybe there's changes afoot. There are some, and I think that we're seeing some fantastic new TV come to our screens and to our palms. But what's your sense of how culture is or isn't shifting in this particular time, when it seems that, as you said, so many people are looking for an explanation for why they feel left out?
Well, I mean, you cited, Succession and Billions, and even though it focuses on the wealthiest of the wealthy, it also denigrates them.
Right.
It also shows that the corruption and the horror that these people can perpetrate on regular people. So that, I think, is good. But as Dan pointed out earlier, we live in information silos, and it's very hard to break out of them. Once you find something that resonates with you, you just stay with it, and you don't look at the broader picture. So our job as filmmakers, as communicators, is to try to find as big an audience as possible to ideas that other people may not be exposed to. So, we're trying. We're trying.
How's it going so far? I know you had your opening screening on Capitol Hill. Is that right?
Yes, we did. And it went very well. And we've had a number of screenings around the country. We opened February 16th in about 100 theaters. And so hopefully, and one of the strategies you have is that we want religious groups, church groups, to take a look at it and share it with their flock and say, talk to each other. What do you think about Christianity? How do you feel about it? How do you feel its movement? Is it representing true Christianity? We want that discussion to hopefully proliferate, and that's why we're coming on your show, Laura.
Well, we're working on it with you in this project. Dan, talk about, or have you been learning things on the road with the film, or as you hear responses to it?
The film is still sort of revved up and raring to go. We've only had minimal screenings. We've gotten, feedback. There's been a lot of press exposure and some limited screenings. The feedback has been amazing. I mean, I would say, one of the things that comments that I was most pleased about, the film does, I think this topic is so sensitive that we worked very, very hard to make sure we were speaking sensitively and appropriately about faith. And to do that also, we have just world-class faith leaders, theologians, experts of every different kind. And overwhelmingly, if you come see the film, the reason you don't need to hear from me and Rob, you should hear from the people in the film. They're the people who I learn the most from. They're in the film because they're the most credible voices on the topic. They're overwhelmingly Christian. A good percentage of them are evangelical Christians themselves. The best comment that I've gotten so far, I did a faith-based podcast a week or two ago, led by a pastor who was shocked by a lot that he had seen. He certainly knew it because he was experiencing it in his own life. But his thought was that it showed up so much more clearly in the film than the way he experienced it in his own life. And he said, sometimes it takes an outsider to an outsider's perspective to show us who we really are. And I thought that was chilling. It was something that I'm very worried about, because you never want to be an outsider. You want to get deep into a subject so that you're telling it in a way that makes sense to the people who it is most central to. And we worked really hard to do that. There's no way, I came at it from the perspective of my concern about American democracy. What we learned along the way is that it's equally a danger to the American church, and we tried to express that in the film.
So you're hoping people will watch the film and not be distracted by the fact that you have a lefty activist Jewish filmmaker, Rob Reiner, as producer. Is that basically what I'm hearing, Dan?
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. No, I think, look, we come together in this country as Americans. And so to some extent, I think the idea that there's any less credibility or any importance that we're going to look at what the faith profile is of the filmmakers to decide if we want to see it or decide if it's important or it's somehow tainted. The film is the film. People should see it and look at the group of people, of dedicated, good citizens who came together in good faith to talk about this urgent problem. And that's what the film is about.
You have extraordinary voices in the film, and their message is very, very strong. And while I'm no evangelical, there is something about evangelicalism that I respect, which is that within certain boundaries, they do believe that people can be changed, saved, rescued, converted, that we're mutable in our beliefs, as our democracy system is also mutable, for good and for less good. Rob, you've gone on a journey yourself, you've talked about in the context of this film. How have you changed in relation to these questions of faith and belief?
Well, again, you shouldn't look at, a left-wing, liberal Jewish person, or Dan, who is of mixed origin and is also secular, was raised secular. Don't listen to us, because, you got to listen to the people that are in the film. Those are the people that are the experts. And for me personally, I was raised secular. I was not raised religiously. Even though I am Jewish, I was not raised that way. But in a time in my life when I was going through the worst period of soul searching, I read everything. I read Buddhism and books about Christianity and Hinduism. I read everything, and what I came around thinking is if you look at the core teachings of Jesus, that makes the most sense and made the most sense to me. The idea of do unto others. And there's a reason why it's called the golden rule, because if you can live by that, everything else falls into place. You don't need the 10 commandments. You don't need a lot if you just live by that rule. And I thought, wow, this is a man. Jesus was somebody who had these thoughts, had these profound thoughts, and was able to spread those ideas. And look what happened. I mean, he didn't prescribe there be a religion based on him, but certainly a lot of people did. And you see this religion around the world, and that's what I focused in on. And then I look at this film and I look at what's happened in this country, and it seems like we've come so far from those teachings, which Reverend Barber, who you mentioned at the beginning, brings us all back to at the end of the film. He talks about what Jesus really stood for, what he taught, and if we all could abide by what he taught, what a great country we would be. And it leaves us with a very uplifting message.
Do you think we'll get there, Rob? What a country this could be?
I do. I mean, it's, in order to form a more perfect union, it says that right in our preamble. And we've certainly done some pretty horrible things in this country, but there's a way that we move a step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, and in fits and starts. I'm an optimist and thinking that we will overcome this and we will strengthen our democracy. And we have no choice, because if we don't, then we go into the dustbin of history. And that would be a horrible, horrible shame of this wonderful experiment that was started, as they say, 249 years ago.
We should point out that the movie God and Country is based on the book, The Power Worshippers by Katherine Stewart. I think it's Stewart in the film who says that we're on a precipice. I might be wrong about that. But thinking about that precipice, Dan, it has to be said, Christian nationalism, as you report, is pretty embedded already in our institutions, whether you're looking at Congress and the Senate or, of course, our Supreme Court. Can it be unembedded?
The comment you're talking about is from Anthea Butler, and it's quite, Dr. Butler is an expert on this. I learned a tremendous amount from her, and at that moment she's talking about the fear that we could slip into a theocratic nation.
Yeah.
And it's quite a shocking thing to hear. I think, and she feels she doesn't know if we're going to stop from going over that precipice. I think we should put some color on that, and because I think that sounds too extreme to a lot of people, like we're not going to be a theocracy. Well, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be as dramatic as all that. I think, but some of these things are already happening. It's really hard to ignore that laws around the country being passed, certainly with regard to abortion, are heavily leaning on faith as a justification for why the laws should be crafted in that way. I think that Christian nationalism, is wrong to think of it as a light switch that's either on or off. You're a Christian nationalist, you're not. The way most of the scholarship views this is really as a spectrum. It's a continuum. And some of the best research on this classifies some different groups, ranging from what they call ambassadors of Christian nationalism, who firmly believe that this is a Christian nation and should be reflected that way in law, all the way down to, then the next tier is accommodators, resistors, and then full-on rejectors. Well, in this top class of ambassadors, those are probably most of the people we're talking about when we say Christian nationalists. This may be as much as 20% of the population. Okay, that's a huge, huge number. 20% who have deeply held beliefs that the United States is and should be officially a Christian nation and are looking to write that into law. That's the population that we have to be worried about. But what makes it so difficult to address is that when you consider the next tier, people who you'd call accommodators of Christian nationalism or even resistors, now you're talking about really almost 2/3 to 3/4 of the country have at least some bit of Christian nationalist belief. And some of it is fine, of course. This is basically a Christian nation. There's a background of Christianity throughout the history of this republic. And so the sort of benign ways that it starts, which is just recognizing that there's a lot of Christian people here, quickly becomes a slippery slope with this casual language of, well, but the United States is basically a Christian nation. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I think what we have to do is we have to draw that bright line again between the separation of church and state, which is a foundational American principle, which I cannot believe in the year 2024 is becoming fuzzy to people.
Well, one of the things I learned that I didn't know before, Robert, from the film was just how recent the word God appears on our coins and the Pledge of Allegiance and all of that. I thought that went back decades, only a few, in fact.
Well, I was in school, actually, in 1954 when they added under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. It used to be one nation, indivisible. Then it became one nation under God, indivisible. And I remember when that happened because we gave that pledge every morning in school. So it really started happening around then. And we've seen it grow over time. But the question you ask, which is how do you undo it? And the way in which you undo it is not, you're never going to get that hardcore group of people that just believe it and you can't convince them. It's those other layers that Dan talked about. If you can get to those people to make them understand that this is destroying their faith in a way, it's undermining their faith, that's the way in which I think you can undo it. And then there's all kinds of pie in the sky kind of things like getting rid of the Electoral College and things like that, which would actually make it more democratic and majority rule, because we are not really majority rule in the country. There are a lot of safeguards for the minority to make sure that they're not, run roughshod over, by the majority. But when that minority gets too much power, then they're running roughshod over the vast majority. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you have to wrestle with. And it's It's in our civics classes, and people have to understand how it works.
I encourage people to stay tuned to our program. I have a piece coming from Idaho soon in our series. I was just out there looking exactly at how that minority rule comes into being and what people can do to, as it were, work within that still for change, including of the meeting people sort. We always close these conversations by asking our guests about the story they think the future will tell of this moment. And I want to ask you that. But before we do, I have one question that relates to the U.S. in the world, because as I think about Christian nationalism and the nationalist part, I think about how easily we've come to believe that the U.S. has a special role in the world, whether it comes to, selling arms everywhere or pursuing a certain ideology or shoring up capitalism and corporations. We've gotten used to that idea of a exceptionalism for the United States. And I wonder if it's connected and if our critique of Christian nationalism also needs to take on that sense that we have of this country's role in international affairs. Dan?
Well, one of the most revelatory things in the film that I think all people on the outside of this movement need to understand is this messianic role that the United States has in the view of a lot of conservative American Christians. So here's how that works, which is if you believe that the United States has a God-ordained role to play in human history as a Christian nation, and democracy is taking us away from those principles, then if you feel like then you can justify to yourself doing pretty much anything to make sure that God's will is done. And that's what I think you see happening in January 6th. There's a lot of discussion about people believing that the election was stolen and ballots and stuff like that. It isn't really about any of that. It's about a more fundamental belief that Trump was acting in God's will to bring this country back to its Christian roots. And that had to happen. And it really didn't matter what the vote was going to be, because that was what God's will was. So that's the version of what you're talking about, the way that idea of American exceptionalism and what's important about the United States in world affairs factors into the Christian national belief. In the bigger picture, the United States gave the world one of the greatest innovations of the United States is this idea of religious liberty, is that understanding that we were going to be that all cultures are ultimately going to be pluralistic. You need to protect the rights of minorities. So the majority faith can't call all the shots. You have to give people freedom to believe what they believe, and you cannot have true religious freedom unless you have a secular government. That's the big innovation of the United States, and it has spread all over the world. And it is also, at risk in a lot of places around the world. But we need to get back to those principles to save both the people of faith and to save the success of democracy.
And Laura, you talked about, American exceptionalism and how it might have been perverted and overtaken by corporations, corporate greed, and so on. But I would say that American exceptionalism can be summed up in the first words of the preamble to the Constitution, which says, "We the people." Now, when you have a Supreme Court saying that a corporation is a person, that's a problem. It's a big problem. But the idea of we the people, this is the first government that ever said it's giving power to the people to make its decisions. So there may be needed reform in how our government works, but the idea of we the people is exceptional. And that idea has to be adhered to, and we have to be able to support that.
Maybe we need to go back and read our Common Sense, Tom Paine. That closing question, both of you, I'd love your answer. What do you think will be the story the future tells of this moment? Dan and Rob.
Well, I think American democracy is wobbling. And if you told me even 10 years ago that might be the case, I wouldn't have believed it. But I think that is the case. I do think I have a lot of faith in this country that we have a robust civic culture that deeply embedded these important American principles that people should be free. They should be free to believe what they want, and that the government should have as limited role in their personal affairs as possible. So I think that people believe that in the United States. I think people genuinely believe in religious liberty. When they see people's religious liberty being restricted, I think Americans broadly reject that. So I think we're gonna get there, but we really have to reconnect people with these as virtues. And I think for whatever reason in this moment, going through this great reckoning right now on race, on sexual predation, on all kinds of things where we're finally trying to reckon with all the ways in which we've fallen short of our great virtues. I think it's become kind of uncool to say that's not who we are. Remember who we are as Americans. But we do need to remember who we are as Americans, because we do pluralism better than anyone in the world. We're good at this, especially the religious liberty part. We've been living in peace side by side, every different faith under the sun, for a really long time. We have to recapture our pride in that.
We've been working on it, at least. Rob?
Well, you hear this every 4 years, that this is the greatest and most important election in our lifetime. And you hear it over and over again. You kind of get dull to that idea. This one actually is. I mean, Dan pointed out earlier that democracy is not going to disappear, with turning a switch. But I can tell you that democracy is on the ballot, and Joe Biden has made that case. And we have a choice here. And it's a very stark choice. We can either choose to continue this wonderful experiment or take a big step towards destroying it. And so, to me, 2024 is the key. And I believe that Americans at the end of the day are going to choose democracy over autocracy. I have to believe that. And so that's what I leave everybody with.
Optimism of the well. Thank you so much. I appreciate you both. Rob Reiner, Dan Partland. The film God and Country releases in mid-February. Check it out. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation from our episode, Faith and Fascism. Rob Reiner and Dan Partland tackle Christian nationalism with God and Country. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to you, our member supporters. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter for a few dollars a month or making a one-time donation at lauraflanders.org/donate.